So now we are going to the most interesting part of this session, our third keynote. And I'm very pleased to be here to welcome and introduce Natasa Milic Frayling, who is research director at the Qatar Computing Research Institute, where she leads the Arabic Language Technology Group. She is professor emerita at the University of Nottingham, where she was chair of data science, and she was teaching professional ethics in computing. She has more than 17 years in Microsoft Research, where she led the Integrated Systems Group. She has many publications, and what is interesting is that they are across different domains, from information retrieval and machine learning to HCI and security, showing diversity and expertise at the same time. She has many patents. Apart from her research profile that I can talk for quite a while because it is so rich, she is also, she was the chair of the ACM Women Europe. She is a member of the subcommittee of the UNESCO Memory of the World Program. She is a member of the ACM Europe Technical Policy Board. I'm pretty sure I'm not saying that correctly, although I am also part of it. And last but not least, something that you are not going to find in her very rich and very intriguing CV is that she is an exceptional speaker with the unique ability to explain complex concepts, complex things in amazingly simple ways. And with that, I would like to welcome Natasa on the stage.
I first have to thank Giorgio for this fantastic introduction. I just wasn't sure who she was talking about. For today, I really wanted to talk about profession, but what she said practically, that I'm an individual with very confused professional profile. I am a mathematician by training, by the way. And when was mentioned that I can simplify things, it is only because in mathematics, as you know, you always start with a definition. When you have definition and axioms, then you can derive everything else. So similarly today, what I'm hoping to achieve, make you interested in a topic that is not always on people's mind. It's about ethics. And the reason why I kind of got involved in this is when I became a chair of data science at the University of Nottingham, after having a very long career in the industry. I wasn't in the room, but somebody probably said, let's give her to teach ethics. And of course, there was nobody else in the room to volunteer for it. I was also surprised that it was kind of a light teaching load, I thought, because it was only one course, and it was only in fall. I didn't realize it was a course that would take about 175 to 180 students, which actually meant 175 essays to grade and 175 final exams to grade with lots of text. You know, we don't do that in maths. Yeah. So I realized there was something, but I must tell you, after 4 years teaching, I was very, very pleased. About 700 students left University of Nottingham knowing more than ethics, more about ethics than I knew before I started teaching. So, and there you will see the subject is extremely important these days because we are facing interesting dilemma. Just yesterday we heard people are asking what's happening with the new disruptions that we have in computing. And we have to ask ourselves, so whose responsibility is that? In fact, we are creating this future and we are creating these disruptions. And so we need to answer these questions. Also, we need to feel empowered that we can affect it. And for some reason, I feel that we don't feel that way. It feels like things are taking off in certain directions as if we can't have any control. So I said, let's go first to our basics to understand what our mandate is as professionals, and then see which way are we empowered to affect. So, as I said, the first question each of you can ask, what is your profession? Who are you? What do you mean by a profession? As I said, introduce myself, I said I'm a mathematician. Well, that means I'm trained as a mathematician, but I spent all my life working with computer scientists. Should I say that I'm a computer scientist? I'm doing all the work that computer scientists do. So really, anybody who lived a bit longer probably switched careers or took different paths. those who are coming out of school, do they say that they're professionals? When people graduated from University of Nottingham, I would sometimes tease and say, so how do you feel now? Are you a software engineer now? They would say, no, I just finished my degree. And so I felt that there was a little bit of a hesitation to take this responsibility for who you are at that moment as a professional. Now there are people on earth who are not shy to say that they're very proud to be professionals. You ask Cristiano Ronaldo, and he'd say, I am professional, and I know I'm a good one because I'm really, really hard on myself. Well, that's very interesting, because that's a criteria that he thinks is the most important. And we know it is. As we aspire to be good, we will work hard. There is another aspect of it. Sometimes we don't really feel like doing things. Well, as Alistair Cook said, professionals are those people who do well even when they don't feel like doing things. So in a way, these are kind of characteristics that we feel are right ones to describe ourselves. But most often, people will say, well, this is a vocation and it requires a very high education and practical experience. But most importantly, what we do not often say, the profession is really an obligation. When I go to a dentist, I really want to rely on the dentist. If I go to a doctor, I rely on the doctor, and I really need them there in their profession to do at their best. Well, similarly, it works for us. We have an obligation to do the best we can in our profession. And then there is a little bit more kind of formal definition that pulled this all together. It was given by Michael Davis. It essentially says that we, as a group of individuals, we are the professionals, and then there is this higher goal that we will try to achieve. Now, this one really talks about ideals that are beyond the market. They're beyond the morality. They're beyond things that we actually every day think we are doing. So the fact that I was working for Microsoft, yes, I was very much determined by what company wants. But as a professional, there should be really just a side bit. Yeah, he pays my check. But as a professional, I should feel more than that. So then the question also is, and that was a question for my students, so what is the difference between morality and ethics, and how does that all relate? And being a mathematician, I really tried to get this crisp, because I knew if you have students who would rather do their robotics than ethics, you really need to be sharp and answer these questions, and you have to simplify things and try to be consistent, even in the field which is not very consistent. If you talk to philosophers, very rarely they'll be very strict with the definitions. But truly, if you look at the society, morality, and ethics, the ethics first is considered as a theory that looks at the morality. And morality, guess what? It's a rule-based system. I was really laughing at this when you think about, so I know what is acceptable, it's not acceptable. And of course, this is so simplified, incredibly simplified, but it's very important to understand that the society has kind of implicitly or sometimes explicitly stated what is the value, what is the biggest value. And often this is related to religion or other types of mechanism by which society tries to propagate the values. Yeah. So ethics is supposed to be a theory around looking how people behave and help with judging what's not moral. But when it comes to the ethics theories, you judge them based on whether they're helpful to you or not. And there are many of them. There are many types of theories, but each of them should help you answer the question at the moment when you're making a decision which way you should choose, especially when you have multiple dilemmas. So if you now go back to the professional ethics as a practice, it is about those rules that we agree, we as a group agree, that we will follow. And the kind of fair thing is, if I expect you to follow something, then I should be also willing to follow what we agreed. So this is the principle. The same is with morality. The morality, the same thing. In society, we expect everybody to follow certain rules. If life is the most important thing, nobody should harm. Nobody should harm, and we are prepared to practice this. So then what is the relationship between the profession and the society? This is a very critical one. Because, you see, in the society, as a profession, we declare that we will provide benefits to others. In return, we have some benefits. we can determine what we want to do. Just like doctors decide what they're going to practice, they have their rules, they have licensing, they have best practices. The same thing with us. We decide what we're going to do. And in some instances, you see, what we decide may not be actually morally permissible. Just to give an example, so if the society says you don't harm, you can't kill, but the professional policeman can do that, and the soldier can do that, because the society said you can do this to defend. Yeah? So things that are morally not permissible become ethically permissible. Similarly, the other way around. Sometimes, like in my country, if you're a doctor, then people are very thankful to you. They will bring you chocolates and wine and chicken or whatever. Well, as a professional, you should not be taking this, because as a professional, you should not be taking anything in return for your services. So this is the fine interplay, but it's a very serious one, because if we do not deliver to the society this sort of social contract that is between us, then may break. And it's a serious matter, because if we as professionals lose trust of the society by not fulfilling our careers and our mission, everything is in jeopardy. So it is actually a very serious matter, but we are not always aware of this social contract that exists, because it's nowhere written, right? We are constantly weighing what can we do, what cannot we do. And I will highlight this a bit more later when we talk about disruptions with AI, disruptions that we had with the web and internet. All of these disruptions were testing our relationship with the society. But then what gives us right to call ourselves profession? If you look at generally, if you look at the professions that are mature, there's normally a pathway. So there is education involved, skill development involved, sometimes there's licensing involved, and then there's ongoing professional development, and most importantly, we form a society. As a society, we come together and we consult on certain things. So these societies then determine also the accreditation of how to bring the new members in, the certifications, if you want special skills, and of course, most importantly, how we're all going to relate to each other and how we're going to practice. So this code of ethics that we have here is beyond what you learn in school. It is the agreement among ourselves, how we're going to operate. Just to clarify one thing that often is confused, certification is something that you go for because voluntarily you would like to improve. So you can take certifications, I don't know, from Cisco or Microsoft or some other organization and say, I'm certified software engineer and I can do this well. Licensing is very different. Licensing is determined by the government. So if you're a medical doctor, you cannot practice unless you have a license to practice. And so licensing for computer scientists would mean that if somebody graduates as a computer engineer, would not be able to practice unless they have a license. Slightly different. I mentioned the societies. Yes, we have IEEE society, and also we have ACM society. These are our professional societies where we come together, we participate, we shape things, and they come back as policies that we follow. Yeah? So this is very, very important for us because this is the way we kind of unite and coordinate. When the profession was in infancy, and I know among us are here people who can't remember because they were not even born then, there was a discussion about what it means to be a software engineer. A serious discussion because it evolved gradually, and then there was a joint effort between IEEE and ACM to do the survey to understand what it means to be a software engineer, and then come up with at least accreditation so that we can get new courses for the new members, and most importantly, code of ethics. So ACM Council decided later that there will be no licensing for software engineers. There are two reasons. One, I think it is really a big obstacle, of course, for people to start practicing, but also if you think about the nature of the work that we have and the speed at which things are moving, it may not be, and I concluded, could not be useful to start licensing people before our practices are fully fledged. And especially at that time, most emphasis was on security, reliability of the systems. Yeah. Now, there are situations when you do have licensing, but for very critical systems. So now I just would like to talk more about the obligations and our responsibility and how that's communicated by the professional community. So, yeah, before was who am I as a professional, now is how do I do my work? And how do we decide to do things? Of course, most of us just do whatever the employer wants us to do. When we pick research, we have more freedom, especially PhD students. They can dream and they can decide, they can aspire. But generally, we all need to adhere to some principles of how we do things. And the IEEE has a code of conduct, code of ethics and code of conduct as two different documents. When you have time, you can go and read. But ACM also has extensive, they put them all together, both of them together. And I will just mention a couple of things in there because I will connect this with the practice that happens in industry. Because we are working in academia, working in institutes, we work in industry. But somehow things slip at some point. And there's no much of the a connection between what we aspire to do as the professionals that you will see now and what we observe. And that's where the frustration comes in, and that's why we often wonder how come there's certain things happen in the ecosystem. We are part of the profession, but we feel disempowered. So within the code of conduct, there are different sections. One is about ethical principles, then professional responsibility. Then there is also about leadership, which is very important. And then how do we comply with the code? And I just pick a couple of these so you can see what is in the general ethical principles. Yesterday we talked about AI, this and that, about biases, about reliability, about privacy, about all sorts of things. I just want you to look at these. These are the principles by which we, computer scientists, said that we would follow. One says, avoid harm. Another talks about the privacy. So honor confidentiality. We know very well what happened with the World Wide Web, and we know very well what happened with the social media, where the privacy was, they said, gone. So we didn't have to go very far. We could just go and consult this document, go and knock on the door of the CEOs of this company and say, look, yes, we can't chase you on the legal issues. And yes, we have to wait maybe for the policies that governments are going to bring in. But according to this, you are behaving unethically. And some companies actually that works. Because many companies now know that you cannot behave unethically and think that your business is going to thrive. Similarly, see on the professional responsibilities. I want to bring one particular one here, the promise that we are not going to release things that we didn't test and that we didn't do due diligence. So how come that ChatGPT is out there, and how come that now we are surprised it's hallucinating? Hallucination is nothing else but a bug. Why is it that? How come? So I just want to say, we don't have to go very far. You can ask very intelligent questions based on these, and you have every right to ask these questions. And I know here, I worked for Microsoft for many years, and we know that every product works the third time. Yep, in 3 releases, the third one will work. So these are the practices. Why are these practices in place? We can challenge them, but we need to be first aware. Now, one thing I mentioned about professional ethics. So that means that each of us, each community has a professional ethic. You talk to the doctor, talk to a lawyer, talk to a financial person. So how do we work together, especially nowadays when we need to work together? Multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary work is very important. That's how impact of computing goes. We go into other sectors. So we need to work together. What do you do if you have different codes of ethics? Fortunately, there is a lot of overlap. And often when we speak to people from other fields, we like to talk about what we call virtue ethics. This is almost like a universal ethics. It was, if anybody is fan of Aristotle, can go back and read about virtue, what it means to be virtuous, and so on. It is a bit funny because to a mathematician it looks like a circular definition. It says the person is virtuous if the person is doing virtual things, and something is virtual because it is done by a virtual person. So anyway, you can imagine. It looks contradictory, but if you look deeper inside, you will see. There's lots of good things you can learn. But I want to point out 2 things. First one is about the practices that we have developed as a profession, in our profession, where we have standards, where we know how we're going to develop systems and release systems. So we can always ask why this is not done in practice as it should be. Yeah? And we know that the systems cannot be any better than what we make them. Therefore, we cannot say that something else made it and it's wrong for some other reasons. It is on us. And there is a procedure normally. If you release something in the ecosystem, you say what's for. You say, I'm designing because I want to help with this and this and that. So how come the ChatGPT doesn't have that? In fact, it doesn't promise anything, doesn't promise it to be good in anything. I just want to say, you can even call on that if it is not clear what the purpose is, and there is no quality assurance and quality control, why is it there? In HCI, human-computer interaction, we have something called technology probe. It is a very, very good thing, and I've done it many times in my career. If you dream up something, if you think that something can be really, really good, so you create an initial system, and then you put it in the control environment. And in Europe, there are so many what we call living labs. In living labs, you have people who live in their homes, and they would test things for you. So you'd come in the control environment, you bring things to find out what they're good for, and then you go back and rethink. Well, that's not what ChatGPT is doing. But we are all in one big lab, and this is all the technology probe, where we are all trying to figure out what is it good for. Now promises of quality assurance and quality control. The worst thing is actually the system itself doesn't have any such mechanisms, right? So this was one thing, whinging about the practices that are not being followed by somebody in the ICT industry and should be following best practices of releasing the system. And the second thing I want to talk about is the privacy one, because that one was my fight. Because over the past 10, 15 years, we knew what happened with the web. We knew, I'll tell you more about it. I just want to say, if anybody is ever wondering where there are rules or where they can find some reference about what it means protecting the privacy, I had long discussions with my students because they would just call stuff and say, oh, Natasha, can I now use this for my PhD? I say, okay, well, check the privacy guidance and you will tell you. So there are these kind of guidance on how you can use other people's data, what you can do with it. One thing that everybody violates is the secondary use. So I want to use this as an example here, because the web was created for one purpose. It was to communicate. People are publishing there. Web was then used for indexing in order to enable search. And now web is used to create LLMs. Yeah? And that's all secondary use. Yeah? So it's not very clear that actually should be used. But I'm just saying, if you needed to reason or you want to challenge something, there is this whole area of a solid taxonomy of privacy that is available to you. You can always do it as a reference. So with respect to the design of the systems, there are some basic rules that you can kind of derive from the principles of taxonomy, and I just want to read a couple of them. No covert data mining and matching. Only collect the data that is needed. And of course, what I just said, that no secondary use. These are the things that are kind of principles. I will now move to the third part of the talk, which reflects on the last disruptions we had, where actually all of this was violated. So everything I told you about the deployment of the systems and monitoring of users, and I'll just remind you how that happened. Those people who haven't lived through that will now learn about this. But before I go there, one thing for sure. Among you, there will be people who would say, I don't want to stop with the paper, and I don't want to stop with my demo. I really want to make an impact by adoption and deployment. Okay, so it is adoption and deployment of a working system. It doesn't have to be part of a revenue-generating activity. It could be open source. It could be non-for-profit. It could be anything. The fact is, at that moment when you decide that you're going to go and deploy something, the responsibility and the type of work is very, very different from what you know up to that point. So you will need a team of people. And you also have to know that if you're trying to do something with research right now, and if that research is advanced research or ahead of time, there's no way you're going to make a business. Because a business is made by the needs or for the needs that exist right now. Unless you want to get an investment and wait 10 years for market to mature, just to prepare you, especially young people who think, okay, great, I have my PhD thesis, and it's obviously very innovative, now I'm going to start a business. Yes, it will be a journey of about 10 years. It's not a problem, just want to say. There are these best practices that you should know. When innovation is put in practice, there are two types. innovations that do not disrupt the ecosystem, that fit very, very nicely. And normally you can then sell, you can then deploy, people will use, because there's no disruption in the ecosystem. All the stakeholders get the same thing as they before. However, when you have disruptive technology, then the whole thing shakes up. And that's what we were discussing also about generative AI. People are wondering what's going to happen with their jobs. This is an extremely disruptive innovation that is happening now. It will be very interesting to see whether there will be right business models, because anything you do, you need economic sustainability. Even if you're in open source, somebody needs to feed the people who are doing it. So it is donations, it is raising money with some foundations and so on. There's always economic sustainability. Only while things are economically sustainable, you will have an impact and you will be able to deliver. So now I'd like to share with you what happened with the previous disruption, and that was during the time of the web. And I was a researcher at the time. At Microsoft Research, I was working on innovating how to improve the user experience with the browser. We were thinking about new favorites and history and back button and all sorts of stuff. Really wanted to help people how to browse the web. And then the software engineer who works on my team, Jamie Costello, Jamie said, Natasha, I was looking at this caching, and I found all of these strange things in there that are called cookies. Yeah. Then we became aware of cookies, started paying attention to cookies. Then we realized a little bit what was going on. On the web, there are these web pages, and these web pages are considered almost like a real estate. Every web page can host an advertisement. So now we realize that the whole web that was indexed and all these machines that came about and that needed to be there in order to crawl 20 billion pages in a few days, all of that cost lots of money. We researchers couldn't really play that game. It was all in, at that time, Alta Vista, and then Yahoo came, and then Northern Light, and then Google came, and then Bing. All these big companies were doing exactly the same thing we see now with the generative AI. We feel we are out of the game because it was very expensive. We couldn't really play. But what's more interesting, what is the economic model for that thing to be sustained? And at the beginning, it wasn't clear. But then, by the fact that there is a real estate where you can put advertisement, became a really, really good one for creating a sustainable model for these. So now the job is for people who are publishing pages, then to attract marketeers to place advertisement. So the whole game became the game of the marketeers. And you and I, we were there just trotting around the globe from one page to another, being monitored, and then advertisements are supposed to be tailored for us. I'm mentioning this because this was really a fantastic thing. If you think from the engineering point of view, when I'm clicking on a page, somebody knows where I am or who I am, whatever that who means. It may not be my name, but then they have some profile of me. And then within 100 milliseconds, the bidding is done. The page that I'm going to see is loaded with all the advertisements. I call this a marvel of 21st century. From the engineer point of view, millions of people are doing it, billions of pages were served. All of that is done by us software engineers, right? And if you think accomplishments was fantastic. Then there was an intern at Microsoft, Richard came and said, okay, people don't even have a clue what's going on here. They have no idea that there are advertisements, and they have no idea that they're being tracked. So let's show them. So we basically created something for Firefox. These little colorful things that you see on the bottom actually drop from the top of the page. You can imagine dramatically go down, and then you can see exactly for each domain that is associated with this page, you can see exactly how many cookies are there. So you see the green one, I might say on the page, New York Times, the green one, very tall one, has lots of cookies from this website. And I said, okay, I forgive you. You are a website I visited, so if you want to collect information, no problem. But all of the other ones were not related to the website. Those were all from somewhere else. So we looked at who these are, which companies these are. And of course, one was really interesting, the DoubleClick one from Google. And there were only 4 cookies, but we realized that during my browsing, the same cookie was placed by 60-something other websites. So there is obviously something going on. These are coordinated. Multiple pages have the same cookies. And yes, then we had a joke. Well, really, the web is such a friendly place. Every page you visit, you get a cookie. The we were also wondering whether people understood what it is. We tried to explain. Just like people now are trying to explain what generative AI is doing, what the prompting is, how to do instructions. We were trying at that time to explain to people what the cookies were. And we built a network to understand who are the trackers. So we even had visualization of the trackers. So in this case, say if I'm on Forbes on the page, I can see exactly who is connected to the Forbes page, who is trying to give me advertisements. And then also we found a fantastic player in the ecosystem. This was DoubleClick, was connected to all of these. So we realized at the time that Google really mastered the sustainability of the web. Thanks to Google, yeah, we can have fantastic search because they found a model that really fed well the company can innovate, and company can provide us with the search because I was not going to pay. I, as an end user, I'm not paying. Then I became a product, and it was my data that was given in exchange for value somewhere else. So in short here, there is a business model, and what we are seeing now with generative AI, there will be business models. It will be very interesting to see who will be the player in exchange of value in that business model. I should also say that social media also contributed to this cookie tracking because what was very interesting, if I would tweet something to you and put a link inside, then you received it. You click on that link, and sometimes they would, you get something like this, oh, by the way, we are using cookies, click on OK. These days you have choice, but at that time you didn't even have choice. They would just tell you there are cookies. But what was most important than whatever was happening on the web was going into the social media. So if we are on Twitter and we keep sending tweets to each other, then we keep contaminating each other or exposing each other with the same cookies. So you can try to clean up, but it doesn't work. So I just want to say, if any of you decide that you want to have an impact and you start a business, you will be thinking about sustainability of your business. You will have to find the business model. This business model violated the ethical principles. Nobody knew that there was monitoring. Nobody knew that there was bidding, profiling. Nobody knew that privacy was affected. In fact, the regulators had to step in later, and because of other reasons. A regulator got stung on other reasons because people realized that everybody was spying on everybody. I just want to say that this sort of business model was not ethical. However, it gave us some value. I want to just show you one other model in which we computer scientists contribute to optimization. And this one, I would say, is more reasonable. It is still profiling people, but it is on an e-commerce platform. So if you are hosting an e-commerce platform, say like Amazon or JD.com in China, this is the one that we studied at the time, then within your platform, you're trying to support the user. And in this instance, if you want to look for a product, you can go and look for the product. You can do the categories. You can do search. You can do comparison, all sorts of stuff. So the whole website is now your experience. You're not going to a shop. You're doing everything online. So for us computer scientists, again, interesting problems about design, interesting problems about how to support. But more importantly is how you do the optimization. So many of you have probably worked on the clickstream analysis and so on. This is a situation where people are on the platform. They were not told that they will be monitored. But because it's within the platform and optimization is clear, it may be forgivable. I personally would still want to see these services declaring that they are giving me only certain things. In real time, they can monitor my session. And this is a graph which basically shows that within a session, while I'm 80% in my session, and I can either buy or not buy, they can still have a 20% of time or prediction to give me an advertisement or something to retain me and change my mind. So I just want to say, in real time, it's possible to predict with very high accuracy here whether people are going to buy or not. How do you feel about that? Would you like that to? Would you like to go to Amazon and say, look, you're just giving me advertisements that I really like, or I would rather not you profiling me. Can you please erase this? This is rubbish. I don't really want my stuff to be shared. If you want to have the dialogue, unfortunately, we don't have it. But I think we partly don't have it because we are not standing for what we said as the professionals would do. And then in the final one section, I just want to touch upon 3 or 4 notions that are often confused and or being used kind of loosely, not very strictly. So you often hear about accountability, and then you hear about responsibility, and then you talk about liability. The code of ethics that we have, that's the basis for accountability and responsibility. So normally the way it goes, first we agree how we're going to behave. That's our ethics. And then we put in place policies that are agreeing with our ethics. So the policy is an intermediary stage. If you need to enforce the policy, then you turn it into law. Because if you want to force people and say you must do it, otherwise you become illegal, then you go for law. But the lots of things are within the policy part. And I know, I mean, in my age, I don't mind getting involved in policies, but when I was younger, I wouldn't even care. I wouldn't even hear it. So this is kind of, for those who would like to be different than me, who would like to get involved, believe me, there is a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do, and really we need a fresh mind, and we need people who really can dig in and make sure that our policies are up to snuff. So first about accountability. Accountability is simply, I did it. I was there. I've done it with you and other people, so accountability is just saying I participated. Lots of times people are worried about accountability because they immediately think they will be blamed for something. Well, blame comes afterwards. You first have to say I've done it, but then also, of course, if you've done something bad, you will be blamed, but you can also say I've done it and it was good. So I just want to say accountability, lots of people are worried about that, and politicians will say, I want you to be accountable. Okay, I can tell you, yes, I did it. I was there, but it doesn't mean I was responsible for anything, because if the harm wasn't done, then there's no reason to worry about responsibility. So nevertheless, in computing, as if you talk to Helen, she tried to do studies about accountability among computer scientists and why people would not volunteer to say, yes, I was there, I've done it. And normally the barriers for accountability adoption is that people say, I was one of many. So, you know, how can you say that I was accountable? Meaning that they're being blamed. They're not being blamed. They're just, yes, you were there, you've done it. Also, people say, well, there are so many bugs, and we know that testing is never perfect. There's always going to be another bug. Don't you blame me for the bug. It's a really complex problem. Nobody on earth has solved this. So why would you now point a finger to me? Similarly, people say, that's not our fault. You know, this is too complex. The system is very complex. So they use the system as a scapegoat. So in general, I should mention this one about companies. There is one thing about companies, the patent. They are also very keen to release products. But on the products, they will put very, very limited warranty. It's really laughable. If you just look at the products that you buy, practically they say, press the button, if it works, works. If it doesn't, return it and we'll give you money back. There are absolutely no guarantees or warranties or anything in this software engineering. So all of this just shows that culture is such that nobody wants to say, I'm accountable, because they're worried about the blame. The one to worry about really is liability. Like if the product was so bad, and in fact, in some actions you violate the law, then you're liable. So if the system fail and then somebody gets hurt, that's a big one. But that's because there are laws to protect consumers. So this is a legal part. But the one in the middle is tricky and very important, and that's the kind of the responsibility one. When are you going to be morally responsible? This is not about going to jail or paying any fee. This is about the moral responsibility as a computer scientist. When do you become morally responsible for something that happens? Okay? And moral responsibility has been sort of taught in many ways, but I'm offering here a simple one that is offered by Douglas Birch, which covers most of the situations that you can reason about. So first of all, if something happens, you have to establish that a person was involved in some way. It doesn't mean that it's a software engineer coding. It could be me. Say I'm a CEO of a company, and the product needs to go out. So I get a report from the chief engineer that all the testing is done, and I say, OK, go. We are going. We are launching on, say, Friday. So my decision, and then something happens. Say there was a software for train, and the train collided, and that's a really big thing now. So now there's a moral responsibility. There will be legal stuff, no problems, but there is a moral responsibility for me, for the company, for everybody. I need to make sure, first of all, that I understand that the practice was in place, and it's not excuse for me as a CEO to say, I didn't know. You cannot say, I didn't know, because it is my job to know. And I have to do everything to know. And if the person who gave me the report and saying that the testing was done, if that was done according to the policy that we've got, then no blame is done. However, if there is negligence, then there is moral responsibility. So all these kind of three factors here are very good kind of a test for any situations you are in. If you're thinking, am I morally responsible for this? If I do satisfy all of these, then yeah, the answer is clear. Okay, so this is about kind of policies and so on. I'd just like to do a couple more things because yesterday during the panel, ChatGPT and generative AI was referred often as if it has some agency, and it's very. I can tell you, anybody who uses this system would behave as these things. They have their own will. That this thing actually learns something and reasons about something. And they completely forget that actually they write a prompt to get things out. And so I just want to clarify a couple of things about the agency. And so I, as a human being, I have a will, and I'm doing things with my own will. So, and I'm capable to do certain things, like in computing or mathematics. And so I have agency that I, as a human being, I can say is attributed to me. Now, if I start using an artifact, a computing artifact, that computing artifact doesn't have agency. Its agency is attached to me. So this is the first thing that is this is offered if you read more about Peter's work on materialism morality. So, because there are lots of discussions about automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles. I like to use automated because autonomous has also a kind of connotation that has own will. In fact, it's a program that is, we are responsible for these programs. So in this instance, the first thing to clarify is that artifact doesn't have agency unless it has an actor. And so it is an actor, in this case, it's a human actor. And the other way around, if I'm an actor and I'm using an artifact, I'm responsible for it. Yeah? So this is about the agencies. And if anybody starts reasoning about artificial intelligence in these different models, generative or not generative, doesn't matter. Just think about this. There's always something, either it's in use or in creation. In use or in creation. So ChatGPT or any other of these LLMs that are there, they are not divorced from the ones who created them, and also they are not divorced from us using them. So if somebody maliciously decides to generate books and with all sorts of nonsense, it is the agency of that person that is now involved with the system. And there is no way around it. Whoever tries to avoid it is not going to work. All right, so now I'm just going to summarize and basically try to explain why I call the title On the Cusp. On the Cusp, and why we have been involved, of course, in great innovation, and we are proud of many things that we have done. However, we really need to watch this time. What happened in the previous disruption, and that I showed you example, there was an attack on privacy. Really, there was an attack on privacy, and because the industry wasn't self-regulating, there was no self-control, then the national governments had to step in. And as many of you are familiar, in Europe in particular, data protection was big, moved in the United States to the degree. Just want to say, the national governments and international governments had to step in to control us. I mean, this is our industry, it's ICT industry, okay? So we went through this. And now we have all sorts of laws to protect. What's happening now is problematic, because this time with the generative AI methods, what we are doing is we're practically mimicking what the human can do. So just before we talked about the agency, I as a person, I have an agency, I can act and I can do it. But if somebody else can do this, pretending it's me, and if I cannot prove that that's not me, then it's a big problem. Because my agency is being removed, and my agency is being faked, and I have no defense. Because the better the models are, the better it is. And I do work at the Qatar Computing Research Institute, and there's a fantastic team there. They're working on language technologies, and among other things, they created voice synthesis. Very great, I mean, great voice synthesis, and we had people from different news say, oh, we have this great anchor, we would like to synthesize the voice of this person. And I go and I freeze, and I speak with this person, I say, get a lawyer. Because the problem here is when somebody takes away your personhood, somebody can mimic your visual expression, your emotions, then there's nothing you can do in digital world. There will be lots of things, watermarking, all sorts of stuff. We will try everything. But fundamentally, this is what's happening. So we have to be extremely careful. If we do not act now, and if we not really push this, we will not be able to stop it. It's like inertia is going, and it's going to take over. And then what we're going to lose is the ability to use digital channel. It's not going to be the end of the world. No, that's not it. It's just that the digital media that we're using for communication is not going to be there anymore, because we couldn't trust anymore. Yeah? And it would be such a pity to do something like that. Yeah. So my call for action is really for all of us. Now I try to kind of quickly go through from basic concept of profession to our ethics, to the principles of ethics, the application of ethics. I really would like us to be braver and bolder in saying who we are and defending the ethical principles, because we do have them. We created them. And we have to have them not only in academia, we have to have them in the workplace. How is that going to happen? But if we try, it will happen. If we don't, if we give up, then we lost it already. So this is one thing. Please be proud of it and push for it. And then you should insist on responsible innovation. Must insist. Because if you have releases of technologies like we had with the generative AIs, where it was released without warning anybody. It's okay when you have innovation, you prepare the ecosystem, because the ecosystem will be affected. But nobody was prepared. So yes, there's all over the place, there are issues. How is this going to be stabilized? We will see. Whether it's going to be much worse than now, we will see. I just want to say, responsible innovation is not only thinking about design, but also how you deploy it, and how you take care of the society you belong to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you have questions, there are 2 microphones on either side of the room. Natasa.
Yes, thank you for the talk. So it was interesting that you gave a quote from Aristotle, although without a reference. So you said to a mathematician it would look like he's giving a circular definition of virtue. So I don't know what the reference is. I assume it is the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2. Actually, if you read the previous paragraph, what he's doing there is that first he's defining virtue itself as a disposition that is rational, settled, and purposeful, and then he defines the virtuous person through the definition of virtue. So it's not really circular.
No, it's not.
It's actually the adjective defined through the noun.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, the definition could be more rigorous, but he's trying to not making circular there.
Yeah, no, it's really fantastic work. I'm just joking, sorry. Okay.
So, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about research, computing research as a profession. I mean, you were speaking mostly about the whole industry, and particularly this thing about responsible innovation at the end. If one is a researcher, how much can one be a researcher without, because one has no control over that downstream processing? Would you advocate actually restricting one's research out of fear of the potential consequences? I mean, in the sort of atomic physics, there was a lot of debate about this. I was wondering how you see this in computing, where in particular, it's very unclear what's going to happen with anything one tries out.
Indeed, thank you for this question. It is, how to say, very important aspect of ethics. Ethics offers different theories. So, and each person or organization needs to decide how to justify or how to examine what they consider ethical. So the main principle of ethical examination is that you pick a theory and you position it, and then you let other challenge it. So if you are doing research, there is a theory of utilitarianism. So I will work on things that are useful, and I will make my choices based on maximizing the benefit of the utility to the society and everything. Or others can say, I don't really care about the consequences, utility, I have a good intent. So most of the time in research, people say, I have a good intent. I can't be responsible for what comes downstream. If you have somebody in the audience challenging you because you can say, no, you can't do this because the consequences are going to be dire. When I'm thinking about ChatGPT and so on, and a release of it without any control, where the spammers can use it to do anything, I'm almost thinking, so what if we invented gunpowder and give gunpowder each person a little bit? Okay, that's going to be nice fireworks. So this is not about research, it's about the deployment of research. So you can do research, but you may need to control it if you think that there will be something of dire consequences. So I'm not, in short, we just need to use ethics theories and examine case by case. I personally don't have a position whether we should restrict or not. It will depend on how we justify.
But I mean, if I could just follow, wouldn't that depend on a good visibility of what the potential consequences are? And
yeah.
I think for a lot of us, we really aren't very good at predicting what might or might not come from this stuff. I mean, many of the uses of generative AI, I don't think anybody could have predicted a lot of those uses and a lot of those impacts. I mean, that seems to be a particular issue for us in computing, this inability to guess how things will be used.
Yes, indeed, this is uncertainty. But you see, nobody can predict the future. So we just make our local in time extrapolations. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, just to add to Alan, but at least we should try to predict, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, you had a slide about moral responsibility, and I was wondering how that, based on what you talked at the slide, how that goes beyond legal responsibility. It looked very much like a legal slide where you're saying there was a harm, there was intent. So how does moral responsibility go beyond the legal responsibility?
Yeah, so when you are, this is what the Bursch recommended if you want to examine your actions. Well, depending on the type of harm, you may be exposed to liability. Otherwise, you're doing the practices and you're trying to improve your organization on your own practices. And people may hold you responsible. So I think this is what we should be doing to the industry. How that's going to affect them, they can say, oh, go away. I don't really care what you do, but most of the time, responsibility people will resign because of moral responsibility, or people will fire people because of moral responsibility.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for this great talk. You gave this example of software licenses that include this liability waiver. And then on the opposite spectrum, we have things like medicine or aviation, which are very strictly regulated. But in these topics, the harm is quite evident because if something goes wrong, people are dead. So how can you quantify the harm that software or computing systems can have? You gave this example at the end that mimicking may lead to the demise of digital communication. How can we quantify that, what that means, and foreground that?
So it is the same principles in any other regulated sector. Believe me, it is only based on what the liability is being the fine is. So we don't have fines for our things, but I can tell you in pharma sector and manufacturing and so on, often the business plan will have a line saying, just in case we get fined for this and this and that, we have it budgeted. In case of computing, it's primarily lawsuits. So you need to worry about what are the potential costs of a lawsuit or any remediation you need. There is no other kind of principle.
Thanks.
Yeah, you spoke about actions and inactions, right? Should database systems or computer systems not process certain queries or stop certain actions because they would cause harm or their results could be used in a biased manner by somebody?
Again, I would just pick a couple of these theories. So, for example, a typical one is utilitarian theory. Believe me, I have great fun with my students. They would say, okay, Natasha, should I be coming today to your course? Because I'm really tired. I had a great party last night. So is this kind of ethical from me not to come to a course? And then there is a Kantian philosophy basically says, you adhere to the behavior that you want to be generalized maximally. So then I come back and say, so if nobody wants to come to the class because they had parties, so don't feel, then there will be no class, and then you will not have an ethics mark, and then you will not graduate. So I just want to say, I would just pick the right theory, and for every of these examples, see what is the threat, and which of these anticipated pathways may be problematic. But as was mentioned before, we can't predict the future. So only those risks that we know, so there's a risk assessment that we know we can reason about it, and there may be lurking ones that we don't.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to ask you about how much do you know about the state of education on ethics on campuses? So you said in your program there's an ethics course in the data science program. Kind of how widespread is that? I went through an entire, maybe like 10 years of education in computer science, and I never was put in a position to take an ethics course, for example. I'm at a university where we don't teach ethics courses. Is there demand for this? What's the state of this, according to your observations?
So I'm familiar with what's happening in UK. It might be that Nottingham is exceptional because they had a full course given to the third-year students. This is the last-year students. And guess what? Even though it was 9 o'clock in the morning on Mondays, and this most was like walking through bed and going to sleep in our ethics course, they did at the end of the year tell me that they wish they had in the first year. They said, I've seen so much by the third year. I should have known all of this before. I know that in the universities, often they would try to fold some of the ethics topics in other courses. So in robotics, they would have a little bit. Machine learning, they would have a little bit, but not full. I personally, the course that I taught, they had 8 lectures, and they were very systematic and very deep. And that's why you get the full overview. That's what I would recommend. I will go to ACM and IEEE and ask why the community doesn't offer these courses that could be given at the conferences and things like that.
Thank you.
I think we have a lot of food for thought about how we do our research, why we do our research, what ChatGPT is doing. Let us thank Natasa for the great talk.